Thank you so much for inviting me here to come and talk to you about home share, its benefits and pitfalls. I always start with this slide. Anybody recognize who's here? Yeah, it's the Golden Girls. And why do I use the Golden Girls? Because so many times people say to me, oh, I want a Golden Girls home. But the thing about a Golden Girls home is that that's actually a sitcom with script writers and trained comedians all making it great fun, but it still creates an idea for people about how much fun it can be to live in shared housing. What I hope to do this time, just like 45 minutes talk, and despite the fact that you were told not to talk, I'm when I want you to talk and ask questions, please. But my plan is that by the end of this, you see the value of shared housing, that I can address some of the usual pitfalls people worry about, and that it encourages more home sharing. Is this going to work for me? Yes. Ooh, too well. Back up. Okay, so how did I get involved in this? I've lived in shared housing almost all my adult life. And I started, like many people of my generation, living in group homes, actually before college, during college, and after college. And I lived for 8 years in an apartment in Porter Square, Somerville, that I just loved. And so I stayed in it. And when I finally left it, I left it for a relationship. At one point in my life, various things happened. I ended up buying that house on purpose to have housemates. It was a 4-bedroom house, Silver Spring, Maryland. And while I was living there, she was complaining about her finances. And I said, well, you have an asset, use it. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, rent a room in your house. And she did something like, I don't know how to do that. And I did something like, well, I do. And she thought about it. We were on the phone, and she said, you're right, you do. Would you coach me? And that made me go, oh, that's very interesting. So it got me thinking about it. And the next day, I was on a bus from Silver Spring, Maryland to New York City. And I pulled out my laptop and I created the outline for the book, Sharing Housing, a Guidebook for Finding and Keeping Good Housemates. I wrote that outline in a brain dump of 2 hours, and then it sat on my computer through several different computers and a move to Vermont, which is where I live now. I live near Brattleboro. And there was the day that I heard myself say to myself as I walked from the bed to the bathroom, are you ever going to do that project? And I went, if I don't, it's going to be a deathbed regret. I went, okay, I'm going to do that project. Bunch of other things happened that made it easier for me to get the book written, and made me feel like I'm supposed to be doing this work. The book came out in 2011. I found myself going, okay, now what? I'm an author, I'm a presenter, not so fast. But we founded Sharing Housing, Inc. as a nonprofit organization in 2017. We are now a nonprofit organization. We're working on figuring out how to be a nonprofit organization with the purpose of advocacy and education. A la, here I am doing that. So our vision, that shared housing becomes universally accepted as a living arrangement, and individuals feel happy, safe, and at peace with homemates, and that organizations encourage shared housing. What do I mean by homemate? A person who you like and respect, whose ways of living at home are compatible enough that everybody is comfortable. This is a word I have coined. we are coining. Please use it. I realized when I was writing about it that my idea of a homemate is a mature housemate relationship. You don't become homemates the first week, but you become homemates as you get comfortable with each other. And it is a completely different relationship than any other relationship a person can have. It's not a lover, it's not a spouse, it's not a family member, it's not even a friend necessarily. It is somebody with whom you have agreed to make a home. Part of the reason this is so strong for me is that I lived with a guy for 4 years named Chris in that Somerville apartment. And I went to his wedding. I was very uncomfortable around him. I'm like, why am I so uncomfortable around him? And I realized that in the 4 years we lived together, we had been outside of the house with each other exactly once. Okay, knew lots about each other's families, had had deep, long conversations about relationships and life and so on, but it was not a relationship that you would normal kind of thing. It's a homemate relationship. Why is this so important? Well, we have a rise of people living alone. And I don't know whether you can see well enough that graphic, but you can see how it is growing exponentially. It's just amazing. And the other reason this is a cause for me is look what happens, household composition. As we age, we are more likely to live alone for the obvious reasons that spouses die, right? And I am on this thing about saying, why is it that we assume that we continue to live in the big house, we raise the family, the spouse dies, and then we live alone? We could have a different adventure. We could be living with others. Feel pretty strongly about that. So Massachusetts, back up. Massachusetts statistics, we have more than 500,000 people living alone over the age of 50. And 28% of houses are single occupancy. That's a pretty consistent statistic across the country. It's always 26, 27, 28% of the households in this country are single occupancy. It's huge. I've got more stats on that kind of a thing, but it's not what I'm here for. Here, just in case, these are the objections I have heard about why I can't live in shared housing. Okay. Got any others? As far as I know, that's the set. And I could spend time talking about each one of them, but I'm putting it up here at the beginning of the show because I want you to know that I know these things, because I'm very pro shared housing. All right, so what are the benefits? They are fivefold, and I'm going to discuss each one of them. And if there were 20 people in the room and we didn't also have Zoom, I would have us do a little exercise. Can't do that quite, but I like doing exercises. The financial benefit, I think, is pretty straightforward. We know about it. Costs less, right? But here are some interesting stats, and part of the reason why I'm so big on this. The blue lines are the average cost of supporting a single person per month. No mortgage, rent, mortgage. In 2014, wow. I haven't been able to find updated stats. It's not gotten better. The yellow is the average Social Security payment for men and for women. Upshot, there's nowhere that a person getting the average Social Security payment can afford to live alone. We have homeless seniors on the street. unhoused seniors. Why? Because they're simply priced out. And they didn't decide early enough to go, I've got a problem, how do I fix it? Maybe I should share housing, because that's the most obvious fix. Right? Okay. Notice that those are average, and we know a lot of people are getting $600, $500, $600, $700 a month, especially women who've had sketchy careers and all of that kind of thing. So I think the cost benefit is sort of obvious, and it is honestly the reason why most people start to share housing. They stick for the other benefits. One of them, of course, is help, or or mutual assistance. And I have that on a spectrum. The green being the convenience of, I'm going away, would you feed the cat? I gotta get my car, can you give me a ride to get my car? I got locked out, are you coming home soon? Convenience, help, right? All the way to the life-threatening emergencies of, I fell, will somebody find me? And of course, that's the horrible one. And I don't even keep the statistic in my head of how many people fall. But it is seniors. I don't remember what the statistic is. Maybe I should put it in my head. I have fallen myself. And I go, oh, that's interesting. I'm getting there too. So this help mutual assistance is one of the reasons why I do see people when they start being frail in their 80s and so on, begin to go, oh, I need help. And part of my pitch here is not to wait, because that's a very different thing to do. And my pitch is that adults can do it for themselves if they know what to do, because adults have agency. And we've made critical decisions in our lives, where to live, the houses to buy, who to marry, etc. The critical decision of who to live with is one we want to make ourselves. That's my take on it. So another benefit, this is going to take a little talking. We are wired to be connected. We lived like this for millennia, in small communities where we saw everybody all the time on a daily basis for our entire lives. Being alone was actually to be socially ostracized. Excommunicated, right? Throw them out. Isolation, throw them out. It's a punishment. And interestingly enough, we do not have a word in English for the opposite of lonely. And I've asked native speakers in other languages, they can't come up with one either. It is as natural to us to be with others as breathing. And it turns out that our brains are wired for social connection. That it's literally true that the pain of loneliness strikes the same part of the brain as the pain of hunger and of thirst. But when you're hungry, you know how to eat. When you're thirsty, you know how to drink. When you're lonely, what do you do? You find a senior center in Massachusetts. You find things to do. But I think we've all discovered through the pandemic how lonely we can get. The thing about this is there are a couple of psychiatrists at the Harvard Medical School who wrote a book called Lonely in America, Drifting Apart in the 21st Century, in which they discovered, as they worked with their people who came in for therapy, which would be Harvard undergraduate students and whatnot, people were lonely. Harvard students were lonely. But what was happening
was they were feeling left out. They were feeling like they weren't part of something. And it's a childish feeling. And when we feel lonely, we feel like it's our fault. We are ashamed of it in a funny way, because somehow we're not popular enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not whatever that might be. They have a story they tell in their book about a friend of theirs, a single woman in her 50s, professional, who has a really busy social life. And so they asked her about it. They said, how do you do that? She said, oh, it's so much work. I do all the asking. People don't ask me. I can't wait for people to ask me. I have to reach out and do it all. So we get this kind of, and I sometimes sit in a restaurant and I look around and I go, how did all these people decide to come and have dinner together? You know, who did the asking? What was that about? It's really easy to end up being quite lonely in our society. And after COVID, I will say that the reaction to what I'm working on has changed radically since the pandemic. It's very interesting to see. So people get lonely, and it's a chronic problem. You guys know this. I have a whole data sheet. Yeah, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all the data. You can look for it. But we know that chronic loneliness has a higher risk of mortality than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. You've heard that stat. Medicare spends $6.7 billion a year on medical procedures related to people being chronically lonely. People who are chronically lonely are more likely to be aggressive, less likely to notice good things happening to them, more likely to notice negative things, have a loss of executive function, eat and drink badly, use alcohol, cigarettes, drugs at a higher rate. And I've been thinking about that horrible incident that's in the paper today about the 16-year-old black kid who got shot by the 85-year-old. So that 85-year-old is sitting in the house alone, feeling vulnerable. And it's an overreaction to that vulnerability. Would it have happened if he'd been sharing housing?
Yeah,
Right? Would it, and there's a whole bunch of things like that. I think that one of the advantages of having a housemate is somebody go, I think I just got scammed. Or what is this thing on my computer? And there's just somebody else to go, yeah, that's weird, go away. You know, go ahead. You look, Bob, you look like you had something you wanted to say.
No,
It's okay.
You're doing good.
So chronic loneliness is a problem. Social isolation does not necessarily mean chronic loneliness. There are people who are very good at having busy social lives, living alone. I'm not necessarily saying those two, but at every single presentation I go to on social isolation, number one cause, living alone. Living alone, you know, so. And it didn't used to be like this.
Right.
They're housemates.
Yeah.
That's why there's a story, right? Their lives are interconnected. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what, I mean, that's a story and it's a highfalutin society house and so on and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, it wasn't that long ago that agricultural workers boarded, teachers boarded, preachers boarded, apprentices boarded, farmhands boarded, widows had rooming houses. We lived together and we accepted it. Oh, and families lived together and all of that, right? But what have we done to ourselves? We've done this. This is the American ideal. The cowboy on the prairie, the self-reliant, take care of things. It's deep in our conscience. It's deep. We think if I'm an adult, I need to take care of myself. And is all of it. Like, I remember early on when I was doing this work, starting to do this work, I got a person who wrote to me and said, I'd be ashamed to have a housemate. And I went, what? Because it implied that she wasn't able to take care of herself. Okay. But this, of course, is a deep myth. We understand it's a myth. The West was not settled by the cowboys by themselves. It's actually settled by people in wagon trains, by people who became part of a town and helped each other raise their barns and all of that kind of good stuff. And we've done this. Yeah. Yeah. It's quite amazing how we have created these deserts of single family houses without the requiring getting into a car to go shopping, to do anything. There's a whole story about that, but it has left people isolated, right? Okay, so you got the point. I want people to share housing so that they have the informal companionship of, hi, how are you? How was your day? I'm not thinking this person might becomes a best friend necessarily, but it's a homemade person. Next, sustainability is another really good reason to share housing. And the kids know this. I mean, I don't need to talk to the kids about this, but if you think about it, if two or three people living together, they're using one coffee pot, one ironing board, one vacuum cleaner, one solar system, one internet system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty obvious. And my last belongs to me completely. This fifth benefit for me, I call it whole person health, because in my belief system, we exist to give and to receive. And when we don't have the opportunity to give and to receive, we shrivel up. We get sad. And it's one of the things that drives me nuts about people saying, I'm so depressed. I want to go out and do something for somebody.
True.
Right?
Very true, yes.
I understand that there's clinical depression and that's hard for some people, but I think some people have not been taught. And it's my mother in my ears saying, go and do something for somebody. But whole person health is a really good reason for living in shared housing. Okay, where am I going now? So that's the summary again. And I'm going to give you some sheets later. Remind me to do that later, not interrupt myself. So I'm back to this homemade definition because I want you to know about that. Person whom you like and respect, whose ways of living at home are compatible enough that everybody is comfortable. So some stories. This is Deb and Sharon. It's a little bit more of a story than what I'm advocating for, but it's a good story because they're so happy about their arrangement. In the purple, Sharon has Parkinson's, and she's had a long career as an executive producer, television, and all of that. And there was a day when she was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to continue to live alone. Either I'm going to find somebody to move in with me, or I'm going to have to go to assisted living. But she couldn't button some stuff. Around the same time, Deb was saying to herself, I've got to get out from under my debt. How am I going to do that? And they found each other through networks of friends of friends kind of thing. And they introduced each other. Welcome. They introduced themselves. They were introduced, and they were meeting a couple of times, and they're kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe we can do this, maybe we shouldn't, or maybe we should, but they hadn't yet made a determination that they were going to live together. And one of the times they were meeting, they both had to leave because they had another meeting to go to. And they each got to that meeting and there they were. I think it was a poetry writing group, but don't quote me on that. At which point they went, okay, fine. And they've been living together now for 5 years. They love it. That's made such a difference for both of them in their lives that they're actually working on developing a home share program in Tucson, Arizona, where they live. And they found me, which is how I know about them. I've just put together a little slide of a lot of pictures of people I have interviewed over the years who live together. I actually love telling the story of the woman in the bottom middle, the elderly woman there. She came to talk I gave in Cleveland at the cathedral. And she's sitting in the front row, and I'm kind of like, why is she here? But later on, we start chatting. She says to me, you know, I lived like that for 30 years, and I never thought nothing of it. And so I interviewed her because all of these pictures come from blog posts on my website. All these people have been interviewed. I have it's not visible, but I have a real people sharing housing kind of. Anyway, Elizabeth said what the way it happened for her was she was a dean at Case Western, and she had a friend who was about 10 years older, who was also a dean, acquaintance, not really a friend, but they'd room together on conferences. And Elizabeth was going through a painful divorce and was mentioned, well, I've got to go find a place to live. And the other woman said, I've got a house, come and move in with me. Just stay out of my kitchen and stay out of my garden. I know your need, so it's okay. So Elizabeth moved in. She said, I was thrilled. I never liked cooking particularly. She was a great cook. I cleaned up and all of that kind of stuff. They became great friends. Enough so that my friend who brought me to Cleveland and is gay said, I know they were a couple. I know they were a couple. And when I interviewed Elizabeth, she said, now I know Tracy thinks we're a couple, but it worked like that. She just, I said, I was never going to ask, but thank you for volunteering. My point partly in the story is that people who live in shared housing just do it. They don't make a big story about it. You don't hear about it. You hear bad stories, but you don't hear the good stories because it's just the way they live. The people on the lower right-hand corner, that's actually a brother and a sister, their spouses and their kids. They all live in one house and have raised their kids together, and the house sets itself up nicely for that kind. Each family has their own kind of living room space and so on, but they live together. On the upper right hand, two women, that piece is called Meanwhile. They started rooming together at nursing school. They graduated. They continued to live together during nursing school. Both of them expected to find somebody and get married. And finally, one of them said, they said, you know, we should just stop renting. We need to buy a condo. Let's just go buy a condo. Reuben with the United Way sign behind him. He's got an Afghan refugee living with him in our small town. It's working out nicely. The two women there were friends. One of them was leaving a bad relationship. Come stay with me for a while. One thing led to another. One of them is a priest. I can't remember which one, Episcopal priest, and got a job in a region. And the other one, and it's like, I can't really afford the housing. And the other one said, well, what if I came and moved with you and if we bought the house together? So, the two dogs, she's meditator, was like, I don't want anybody on my property, but I need help. And she actually created an apartment, ADU kind of apartment, and had somebody move in. And when I talked to her, she said, I'm so happy now that I'm aware that somebody else knows what my comings and goings. would be aware if something was wrong. In the middle, interesting guy. I don't know what's happened lately for him. He and his husband, or well, whatever, have created a home for people to die in, so that they don't have to go to hospice or be in a hospital, but are around caring, loving people. And I just got a query from somebody else who wants to do that. And I need to call her. And then this is a happy story. She took my courses and is a happy housemate. This story, the three of them, what happened there was one over to the right, widow, living in a great big house, was all cozied up for an evening of movie watching. She got in her bed, she had her bathrobe on and so on. And she said it, I was idly picking at a scab on my leg when all of a sudden there was blood everywhere. I got myself down to the kitchen and I lay on the floor and I said to myself, well, if it doesn't stop bleeding in 15 minutes, I'll call for help. To which her doctor said to her later, how did you know you'd still be alive in 15 minutes? Which is when she said, don't think I want to keep living alone. So she turned to two friends. The three of them had taken trips together. And in fact, once lived in an RV for 2 weeks. So she turned to these two friends and said, how do you feel about sharing housing? And they said, yeah, let's do that. And they went looking for a place where they could all kind of move in together. And we'll talk some more about that. And they weren't finding it. They weren't finding it. Finally, the two said to her, you know, your house is a really good house for this. And she said, you don't mind moving into what's now my house? And I said, no, we'll work it out. So she did. And one of the things she said to me when I interviewed her was, I realized it was work to clean out 4 rooms she cleaned out to make room for her friends. And she said, but you know, as I was doing it, I said, this is less work than downsizing. Yeah. The last thing that's important about what she said to me at the very, very end of our interview, she said, I'm not sure I would have done this with just one other person. I like that we're 3. And I said, why? And she said, well, you know, if Tuesday morning you're looking at the paper and somebody says, hey, Saturday there's a crafts fair, and everybody says, oh, that's cool, let's go. And then somebody wakes up on Saturday morning and says, I don't really feel like doing it. You're not left high and dry. But when she said that, I realized that all my housemate relationships have been 3 people. I like 3. I think 3 creates a dynamism of a group that is different than the one-on-one kind of thing. So I'm just putting that in your heads as well. I really like that. So people sometimes say, how do you, but bad housemates. I should have this on a thing, so I talk to one at a time. Sorry. I'm going to start at the top. The golden rule. Sometimes people say, but not everybody. How do they say it? Well, not everybody can be a good home sharer. And I go, yeah, that's right. People who can home share are people who can live by the golden rule. You have to be willing to adapt. We have a process. Sharing housing has a whole process, which is part of what's in the book, about how you select somebody. And I teach it, and I have an online class. I'm getting ahead of myself. So you've taken care of anything that would be a major conflict. You've figured that out before you've agreed to live together. But then there's a little give and take sometimes. Please don't leave your coffee spoons in the sink, that drives me nuts, or so on and so forth. So the golden rule, and we live in a society where a lot of people don't know how to do that. That's real, unfortunately. This is coupled, the golden rule is coupled with do it while it's easy. And what that means to me is that you speak up about any little nit that shows up before it becomes a big deal. It's also good relationship strategy, right? To take care of things before they become a big deal. It is very important to me that the way privacy is managed in shared housing is that your room is always your own, period. No reason for anybody to be in your room without invitation. And this is the point when I want to say that if it's possible to have shared housing where a person has a bedroom, a sitting room, and a bathroom, people be comfortable if it's possible, right? Now, I do think people can share bathrooms. I did it for years, I think. But I had a whole conversation in one of my Q&As with people talking about why they want their own bathrooms, which includes being older and being worried about waking up other people when you get up in the middle of the night. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. But your room is your own. I had in my house, I had it for 4 or 5 years. I had a young man by the name of John, who was a really nice guy. And he was great in the kitchen. He was great around the common areas. Every now and then he'd leave his room door ajar and I'd see it. I'd go, because it was a mess. It was just a mess, but it was none of my business. It was his room. Okay. And finally, and this is more for the younger folks, but it's something I feel very important. And actually I owe it to my roommate, Chris, my housemate, Chris, that I mentioned earlier, who said to me when he interviewed for us to live in the apartment in Somerville, so we have an incest taboo, right? I was taken aback. I was in my 30s. I was taken aback. Now, oh, okay. It was so helpful because he and I got close, and I was single and he was single. And it could have been very confusing about what this closeness was about. And the thing about having an incest taboo clearly stated is that it takes that out. The problem with sleeping with your housemate is now you're married. You can't date, you're already living together. And what happens if it's a one-night stand for one of them and not for the other? And then yeah, every now and then I get these emails from a woman, oh, one thing led to another, and now I don't know what he thinks, and and I say, move out, move out. Somebody's going to lose their home, which is why the incest taboo, and I keep it up there because. So I have a friend from forever who recently started living with a guy, a housemate kind of guy in Arizona. Or in Mexico, I think. And we were chatting and she said, I raised the incest taboo when we were talking about and arranging and we agreed to it. She said, I am so glad. Because I could feel it those first 2 weeks. I could kind of feel the energy, but now it's over and we're done. Yeah, you know. So those are my principles for successful home sharing. The only person who likes change is a wet baby. Moving is the second hardest thing. Nobody likes to move. People who move are desperate to move or must move or something like that. So I am very well aware of the fact that there is a long time from when this idea first shows up to taking action, making things happen, and all of that. I'm aware still. How do you get there? So there are various different ways to think about how people get there. There are social service programs the New York Foundation. Oh, this is, I forgot to check the slide. This is a slide I did for people in New York. But social service programs, that they do matching. And there's something called the National Shared Housing Resource Center, which lists these programs. They're great. I like matching programs. There's just not enough of them in the world. There's online matching. So there are websites that offer matching. Silver Nest is a big one. Nesterly is one, actually started in Boston to match older people with students for help and that kind of stuff. Senior home shares, I'm not even sure they're alive. Or support people to find their own, which is what we think we're doing. Because, as I said to you before, adults have agency. And this is Jean, Karen, and Louise. And this is a picture that's taken in their backyard of the house that they bought together and lived in for 10 years. But they don't live together anymore. And part of the reason I like to say that is because home share doesn't have to feel like it's permanent. It can feel like it's good enough for now until things change. And what happened was Karen, who's the farthest one away, retired, wanted to be in Florida, wanted to be on the beach, got herself one place, then decided she needed a bigger place. Talked to Louise, who's in the pale blue in front, into moving with her to Florida. They had a condo, they retrofitted it. It was going to be, they were living in it until they went out feet first, kind of thing. Karen fell in love. That wasn't supposed to happen. So Karen said, I got to get out of this arrangement. So Karen fell in love. Jean in the middle, who stayed behind, this was in Pittsburgh, is now married. Found somebody, I don't know what the story is there. And Louise is living by herself. Mezzo, okay, working really hard on Democratic politics in Florida. But my point is, it doesn't have to be forever. They also wrote a book about buying together called Our House, My House, Our House, which is really cool. So when I think about what I'm trying to do with sharing housing and then talking to you guys, I know that there are an awful lot of people who can just go off and do it themselves. They're high in independence, low in vulnerability. They're do-it-yourselfers, and they're like, what's the big deal? The other end, high in vulnerability, low in independence, absolutely need matching programs and need help. But there's a huge number of people in the middle who, if they had a framework, if they had an understanding about how do you go about doing this thing, how do you go talk to somebody, they could do it themselves. And so that's what we're trying to do. And this is us, sharinghousing.com. We sell books. These are samples here. We have, we have the key there. That's a free online course. It's a half an hour. Course is a big word. Took me a while to realize people thought it was college level. No, it's not. It's just a little half an hour. It's me talking through the 5 key benefits, some of which you've heard today. Next to that, we also have Sharing Housing 101, which is first time through about 45 minutes. My take on it is that people want to watch it many more times, but there's a cost, but sliding scale and all of that. Every now and then I offer a 4-session Zoom class called Discovering Shared Housing. I've got one running right now. So I'm not sure when the next one's going to be, and I have to start being more institutional about that. And of course, we have our website and the monthly Q&As. And the monthly Q&As are open to anybody. And this is when I say, if you want to be on our newsletter list, please give us your name and your email address, and I'll add you to our newsletter list. We try to send up something once a week, more or less, whether a blog post, a reminder about Q&As, something that's interesting about shared housing. We will never sell your emails. So on that note, here's Margaret Mead. I think it is an almost universal human need to have someone who wonders where you are when you don't come home at night. Ta-da. Questions? Huh?
Maybe you can stop sharing.
Oh, I could stop sharing. Yes, I could stop sharing. Or you could. So I've just bombarded you with all sorts of stuff, and I am open to questions and thoughts and concerns.
That was great, Annamarie. Thank you so much.
You're
I
welcome.
really,
It is wonderful.
we really appreciated it. And,
You're welcome.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to leave soon. Do you have a card? And
I have
let me just come over
cards,
and take a look.
and this is our brochure for our nonprofit.
Yeah.
I gave you one already. So you are welcome to take more than one, et cetera, and all of that.
I think it's wonderful, the info you put in. I don't want to live alone, and I know that. I hate eating alone.
Do you have a building that will allow you to have a housemate?
Well, I take care of my 89-year-old husband right now,
Ah,
and
wow,
that consumes my.
I can imagine.
But I do realize at some point, I might be by myself. And I think,
Start looking now. Start,
I
so I
know.
don't mean looking, I mean, start. So I don't go in these kinds of talks, I don't go through what is the process for selecting a housemate. Sharing Housing 101 does
Yeah,
that, the book
okay.
does that, and all of that kind of stuff. My experience is that the best housemates come through friends of friends of friends of friends of friends of friends of friends, the community.
Yeah.
And so, since I absolutely believe that the universe helps when we want the universe to help, I think sort of beginning to kind of make noises and put out feelers and listen makes a lot of sense, because this takes time to percolate and to dream about.
Yeah.
So that's
Well, I have thought about it.
so you were a younger wife. That's what I'm thinking.
I was 21.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot younger than.
We were thinking you're a lot younger than 89.
No, my husband, I'm 83.
Oh, what?
6 years.
Well, you're
It's
in for-
interesting
oh,
how different
fantastic.
6 years can make.
I'm just wondering if the point, I've lived in Kerala for 47 years,
Oh, wow.
but I've always worked in Boston, or for many of those years. I spent some years across, but for most of those years I've been in Boston. And so, I have a lot of friends, but so many of my wonderful friends have moved out of
Yes.
town, and I'd love to stay here, but I'm wondering if the Council on Aging can get people together like us
And talk
to get to
about it.
meet each other, just to talk about it,
And say, it's a possibility.
like we're thinking about it.
I am thinking about
Yeah,
it, right.
so it would be so nice. I don't know if you guys can facilitate something like that.
Tell
But-
Carol.
But
Sure.
that would be really awesome, just to get to talk to people who have.
If we
these
had a
interests.
senior center, we could do that.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I had to get
No,
that.
but you're right,
Yeah.
though.
No,
Yes.
really, it was,
Those conversations are just now.
yeah, it would.
It could be, my brain is organizing already. It could be that a cluster of senior centers might sponsor shared housing discussion group kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yes, something like that.
Yeah.
That would be so.
Yeah.
That'd be great,
It
just
would
to be with people interested.
So come to the
And,
Q
you
and
feel
A.
safer with people from your town or near or Westford or,
Right.
where we have friends and we know people.
Right, so when you talk about things,
Oh,
Yeah.
so we have Rajan, Rajan, that wants to ask a question. You can, yeah, here he is. See him right there at the top.
I see him. Hello.
I'm there. We could hardly hear about 10 to 20% of the conversation, but we assume that's due to new technology. number one. Number two, I think what Annamarie has talked about is definitely something that is very appropriate as a need. And I think that there are many, many questions. I'm sure I could listen to Annamarie and understand the depth of her experience of dealing with real people in real situations. It's not just for older people, it's for younger people too. There's huge numbers of young people who are looking to live alone because either they don't want to get married or they hear about all kinds of things. And they are looking for roommates or housemates. And I don't mean to belabor the discussion, but young people with older people is also a good combination, you know?
Fabulous,
Agree, for sure.
fabulous combination. Yes.
Yeah.
I do not mean to I don't mean, it's so interesting. Your picture is up there, of course, and if I look at the camera, you will think I'm looking at you.
Yes,
Um,
yes. I understand.
I don't mean to sound as if I'm not interested in the younger generations. What I have found out is that the younger generations don't think they need me. They can just go do it. They just do it. They don't want to spend time learning about how to do it and don't need to be.